Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be tackling Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness.
Oh, this one is, it's a real mind bender.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah, Taleb, he's got this background as a trader, right?
Right.
And it gives him this really sharp view of how random events can just totally upend like all our expectations, especially in finance. But he kind of goes way beyond just the market analysis.
Yeah.
He really dives into these like deep philosophical questions, about how we all perceive success, failure, the role of luck, in our lives, all that.
Yeah. So what does this all mean for, us normal people?
Well, get ready to question, like, everything you think you know about skill versus luck.
Okay.
Taleb really wants us to open our eyes to these, like, hidden forces of randomness, They're just out there shaping our world, whether we realize it or not.
That sounds intriguing.
Oh?
I'm ready. So where do we even begin with this?
Well, he kicks things off with this parable. It's called Solon's Warning. And it's this story about King Croesus, who was, like, considered the richest man alive. This is back in ancient Lydia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and Croesus, he's totally convinced of his own happiness, but he gets this warning from this wise man named Solon, and Solon's like, yo, fate is fickle, man. You see, Solon, he argues that true happiness, you can't measure that just by, like, wealth or status.
Right.
Because fortune, it's always changing.
So it's kind of like that saying, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Exactly. Taleb uses this whole story to show how we can be fooled by, appearances. That we tend to just fixate on, like, the current success, but we don't think about all the chance that was involved. Or the fact that things could totally reverse,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we're only looking at one frame, like in a movie.
Right.
And we just assume we know the whole story. What happens when you, like, rewind and see all the different paths, that could have led to that one point?
That's a great way to put it. That's actually, he calls it the idea of alternative histories.
Oh, okay.
Like, what if those seemingly brilliant decisions, they actually led to disaster? Or what if that lucky streak was just a random, like, blip, in a long line of losses? It forces us to kind of think beyond the obvious and consider like the hidden role of chance.
Yeah, makes you wonder how many successful people are just riding a wave of luck, huh?
Precisely. And this leads us to the next big idea. He calls the problem of induction.
Okay.
And to show this, he uses this simple but powerful example. Have you heard of the black swan?
Ah, the black swan. Yeah. Okay, remind me about this one.
Okay, so just because you've only seen white swans, right? It doesn't mean that black swans don't exist.
Right.
You can't prove something true just because you haven't seen evidence to the contrary.
So you're saying one single black swan can, like, shatter your whole worldview.
Exactly. And this is especially true in areas like, finance, where there's just tons of randomness, right?
Yeah.
So just because a trade or an investment did well in the past doesn't guarantee it will continue doing so in the future.
So past performance is not indicative of future results, as they say.
Right. And to drive this point home, Taleb, he uses this analogy, monkeys on typewriters.
Okay.
If you have enough monkeys, just randomly hitting keys, eventually, just by chance, one of them is bound to produce, like, the works of Shakespeare.
Okay, I love that analogy. So is he saying that all those, like, hotshot traders are just lucky monkeys?
He's certainly challenging us to, at least consider that possibility, right? But
Yeah.
it makes you question how much of what we see as skill is actually just blind luck.
Man, this is making me rethink my whole approach to investing. What else does Taleb say?
Well, next, he digs into this concept called skewness and asymmetry.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting, especially when we're talking about risk.
Okay, break this down for me. What is skewness?
Okay, so think of it like a seesaw, but it's totally unbalanced.
Okay.
Okay, so in finance, what skewness means is that profits and losses, they're not evenly distributed.
Okay.
Like a perfect example is options trading. An option seller, they might make, small profits insistently for a long time, but then bam, one single event happens, wipes out all those gains.
So it's like slow and steady wins the race until, like, a meteor comes and crashes the party.
Exactly. And that's the danger of, like, negative skew, right?
Yeah.
You can be lulled into this false sense of security,
Right.
just because you have these small wins, you think you have it all figured out, and then this, like, rare event just comes and totally blindsides you.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that's where, like, human psychology comes in. We tend to ignore those those low probability, high impact events.
Precisely. We're going to get into this more later, the whole probability blind brain thing.
Okay.
But it's important to understand that this tendency, to ignore the tails of the distribution can lead to some really bad consequences.
Okay, so we've talked about Solon's warning, the fickle nature of fate, the problem of induction, and the black swan, and now we're talking about the dangers of negative skewness. So what else does Taleb have up his sleeve? This is already blowing my mind.
Well, next he goes after one of the most pervasive illusions out there. It's called survivorship bias.
Okay.
And this is something that impacts us like every day, pretty much every area of our lives.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of survivorship bias. Is that like where we only see the winners?
It's just right.
Not all the people who tried and failed along the way.
Right. We only focus on the survivors, and that can make us think the odds of success are way higher than they really are.
Right.
Like a classic example is hedge fund managers.
Right.
If you just look at the funds that are still in business, you're totally missing all the ones that went bust.
Right. So the data is skewed because we're not seeing the whole picture. It's like judging how well a diet works, but you only talk to the people who actually stuck with it.
That's a great analogy. And that bias can really distort our whole perception of success. Like, we might see someone who's super wealthy or famous, and we think, oh, wow, they must be so skilled or talented. But we totally forget about all the people who tried to do the same thing and totally failed.
So are you saying that a lot of success just boils down to being in the right place at the right time?
It's definitely a factor that we tend to overlook. Like, we give all the credit to skill and talent, and we downplay all the luck and circumstance,
Man, this is making me rethink my whole definition of success. If we're only seeing the highlight reel, how can we judge anything accurately?
That's the key insight, right. Survivorship bias makes it super hard to separate skill from luck. And that can lead us to make some really bad decisions, especially if we're chasing these outcomes that might just be due to chance.
Okay, so we got to be more critical, about what we see and hear. And we can't take those success stories at face value. What's next?
Okay, well, now we're getting to the heart of it all, the probability blind brain.
Okay.
Taleb argues our brains just aren't wired to naturally get, probability.
Okay.
We evolved in a much simpler world. Cause and effect, it was straightforward back then.
So we're like walking around with Stone Age brains,
right,
trying to navigate this super complex world with information overload. No wonder we get fooled by randomness.
It's a recipe for disaster, especially when you add in all those cognitive biases, that cloud our thinking.
Right.
Taleb, he points out a few key ones, like the availability heuristic.
Which is?
Well, it makes us overestimate the likelihood of stuff that's easy to remember. Like those vivid tragedies you see on the news all the time. Like, we might be more afraid of shark attacks than car accidents. Even though statistically car accidents are way more likely, our brains, they're drawn to that dramatic stuff.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
We remember the scary stuff more vividly, even if it's, rare.
Exactly. Then there's the representativeness heuristic.
Okay.
And that one makes us judge probabilities based on stereotypes. So we make these snap judgments based on, superficial stuff, and we ignore the base rates and the underlying probabilities.
Oh, I know this one. Like, if we meet someone who fits our stereotype of, let's say, a librarian, quiet, bookish, wearing glasses.
Right.
We might think they're more likely to be a librarian than, a salesperson, even though there are way more salespeople out there statistically.
Exactly. We let our biases kind of fill in the blanks. And that's what Taleb calls probability blindness. And it makes us so susceptible to illusions, and errors in judgment, especially when things are uncertain.
Okay. So we've covered a lot. Randomness, it's playing a bigger role than we realize, and our brains just aren't equipped to deal with it very well. So what can we do about it? Does Taleb offer any, practical advice to navigate this minefield?
Oh, he definitely doesn't leave us hanging.
Okay.
Good fact, he gives us some pretty insightful, actionable advice.
Okay.
One of the key takeaways is to be really skeptical, of track records and predictions.
Of course.
Especially in fields like, finance, where randomness is, everywhere, right?
So don't blindly follow, the hottest fund manager.
Right.
Or get caught up in the latest, market hype.
Right.
Past performance it really is no guarantee of future results.
Exactly. Remember those monkeys on the typewriters?
Yeah.
That short-term success can be so misleading.
Right.
So instead of just chasing returns, Taleb, he suggests like flipping the script, focusing on the process instead of the outcome.
Okay.
So ask yourself, is this person making good decisions based on a solid process?
Right.
Or are they just getting lucky, you know?
It's like the difference between someone who wins at poker because they, like, understand the odds versus someone who just, gets dealt a good hand.
That's a great way to put it. Look for evidence of, good judgment, a disciplined approach, a deep understanding of risk.
Okay.
Don't just focus on the outcome,
So it's about looking beyond the surface and understanding the how and the why.
Yes.
Not just the what.
Exactly. And that leads to another important point. You got to be aware of your own biases.
Right.
And try to, mitigate them.
Oh, easier said than done, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like our brains are wired for these biases.
Right.
It's like we're trying to fight against our own nature.
It's definitely a challenge, but awareness, that's the first step, right?
Okay.
Once you know about these biases, you can start to put systems in place to fight back.
So what kind of systems are we talking about? Can you give me an example?
Sure. So let's say you're thinking about an investment opportunity.
Okay.
So instead of just going with your gut, or getting caught up in the hype, take a step back.
Okay.
Analyze the situation objectively.
Right.
Look at the data. Think about the potential risks, the downsides.
Okay.
And get a second opinion, from someone you trust.
That makes sense. Have a more systematic approach.
Right.
Instead of just, reacting emotionally.
Precisely. And another crucial piece of advice from Taleb.
Okay.
Embrace some uncertainty. You can't control everything.
Right.
But you can control how you respond to the unexpected.
So accept that randomness is just part of life.
Yeah.
And learn to roll with the punches.
Exactly.
Right.
And, that's where a bit of Stoic philosophy can be really helpful.
Okay.
Focus on what you can control, your actions, your decisions, how you respond.
Right.
Don't get too hung up on specific outcomes.
Okay. So a little stoicism can help us deal with all this randomness. Embrace the unknown.
Yeah.
Focus on what you can control. Don't get too obsessed with specific outcomes.
Yeah. It's a good summary.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that Taleb, he even argues that randomness can have some benefits.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he thinks that some level of uncertainty, it can actually make life more, interesting, fulfilling.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, think about it. If everything was predictable,
Right.
and went according to plan, life would be kind of boring, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Randomness keeps us on our toes. It forces us to adapt, to learn, keeps us from getting complacent.
So it's like a spice that adds flavor and excitement.
I like that analogy.
Not too much, but just enough to keep things interesting.
It's about finding that balance between planning and being spontaneous.
Yeah.
Between control and letting go.
Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. A little randomness can spice things up.
Yeah.
What are some other benefits? Does he mention any others?
He talks about how randomness can be good for scientific discovery.
Oh, okay.
He points out that a lot of groundbreaking discoveries, they happen by chance. Researchers, they were open to unexpected results. They followed a path they didn't plan on.
So sometimes the best discoveries are the ones you weren't even looking for. It's about being open to the unexpected.
Exactly.
Embracing serendipity.
It's about cultivating a mindset, that's open to exploration, willing to embrace the unknown, and able to adapt. This applies to, our personal lives, too.
So don't be so rigid in your plans.
Right.
That you miss out on those spontaneous adventures, the unexpected opportunities.
Precisely. Be open to detours, be flexible, embrace those unexpected turns that can lead you to new discoveries.
This is making me rethink my whole approach to life. It's not about controlling every little detail. It's about being adaptable and resilient. Right, when things are uncertain. What else does he say about embracing randomness?
Well, he uses this example of a suburban commuter who's completely enslaved to his routine. His schedule, it's so rigid.
Wow.
He's constantly worried about missing his train. Can't even enjoy dinner with friends, because he's so tied to his routine.
I know that type. Always checking their watch, rushing off before dessert. No spontaneity at all.
Exactly. And Taleb, he contrasts this with A more flexible approach where you allow for some randomness, you know? You're open to new experiences. You can adapt to changing circumstances.
Right.
You know, a little chaos doesn't throw you off.
That sounds a lot more fun. It's
Yeah.
about being present, you know?
Yeah.
And enjoying the adventure.
Yeah.
Not constantly worried about what might go wrong.
Precisely. And he even applies this to the financial markets, you know?
Yep.
He says that when central banks try to control interest rates too much, you know, too tightly, it can actually backfire.
Oh, really?
It can make the system more fragile
Mm.
by letting things fluctuate a little bit, you know?
Right.
Introducing some randomness. It's like creating a buffer, you know, in case of shocks.
So a little bit of wiggle room can actually make the system stronger.
Yeah, kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it.
It does.
It shows the difference between trying to control the outcome, which you can't always do, and focusing on building a system that can handle a lot of different outcomes,
Right.
including the unexpected.
So this has been a really eye-opening deep dive, I think,
Yeah.
into Nassim Taleb's Fooled by Randomness. We've seen how we can be fooled by randomness, but also we've seen how there can be benefits
Yeah.
to embracing a little uncertainty.
It's about finding that sweet spot between being cautious and being bold,
Right.
between planning and spontaneity.
And it all starts with, you know, understanding randomness,
Yeah,
how it's shaping our world.
it's powerful.
So where do we go from here? How do we, like, take all this stuff about randomness and actually apply it to our lives?
That's the million-dollar question. You know, one of the biggest takeaways from Taleb is that accepting randomness, it's not about giving up.
Okay.
It's not about just saying, oh, well, fate, you know, whatever happens, happens.
Right.
It's about having a realistic perspective, understanding that we don't have total control over the outcomes.
So we can't control everything, but we can control, like, how we react, how we prepare.
Exactly. We can control our actions, our decisions, our responses. We can choose to be prepared, to be adaptable, you know, to be resilient.
Right.
And that can be really powerful.
So instead of being, like, super anxious about stuff we can't control, we can, like, shift our energy to the things we can influence.
Exactly.
Like building our skills.
Yeah.
Developing good habits.
Right.
Making good decisions.
That's it. It's about shifting our focus, right?
Yeah.
From trying to, like, predict and control, which you can't really do with randomness, to building resilience and developing a mindset that can thrive even when things are uncertain.
It's kind of like learning to surf. You can't control the waves,
Right.
but you can learn how to ride them.
I love that analogy. You know, in a way, when you acknowledge randomness, it can actually make you appreciate the things you can control even more.
Oh, interesting.
It lets you celebrate your successes without getting, like, a big head. And it helps you learn from your failures without being totally crushed.
Yeah. There's a certain, like, humility that comes with knowing you can't control everything.
Right.
It's not about denying, like, your own actions, your own choices.
Right.
But it's recognizing that there are, you know, forces at play that are bigger than us.
Exactly. And that can lead to, you know, a more balanced, fulfilling life. We can aim for excellence, but not be attached to a specific result, knowing that, you know, in the end, luck is always going to play a role.
This has been a really, really fascinating deep dive, I think, into how randomness, you know, affects our lives.
Yeah, it's a big one.
We've explored how we can be fooled by it, but also how there can be benefits to accepting a little uncertainty.
What's powerful about Taleb's work is that, you know, he doesn't just give us easy answers.
Right.
Or simple solutions.
Right.
He makes us think critically, you know, question our beliefs, really try to understand this complex relationship between, you know, skill, luck, randomness.
It's definitely a book that makes you think, even after you finish reading it. It reminds us to stay humble, to embrace the unexpected, and to focus on what really matters, even when the world is unpredictable.
So as you go about your day, you know, think about this. How much of your success or failure has been because of things outside your control?
Yeah.
And how can you use, you know, what we've learned from Taleb to make better decisions, to handle uncertainty better, and ultimately to live a better life?
That's a great question for our listeners to think about. And remember, like Taleb says, it is far easier to figure out if something is fragile than to predict the occurrence of an event that may harm it.
Right.
So focus on building robustness.
Yeah.
Cultivate that adaptable mindset. And don't be afraid to ride the waves of randomness. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.